Sri Lanka is known as a biodiversity hotspot, but it also has the highest rate of primary forest destruction, which means our species are in dire straits. But then there is plant. An initiative of the Wildlife and Nature Protection Society, there are plans on building a 1,000 species refuge to save our diversity. Ambitious, you may say, but we have to start somewhere. So we asked Vice President of WNPS and Chairman of Plant, Sriyan de S Wijeyeratne, to come on the show. He's been on the show before, but he will give us a clearer picture. A refuge for 1,000 species, that's a very ambitious project, Sriyan. How do you plan on going about doing this?
It is an ambitious plan, but it didn't start with a 1,000 number or anything like that. The Wildlife and Nature Protection Society in 2020 set up an initiative called Plant, Preserving Land and Nature. The whole idea was to get private sector involved in conservation, create their own private conservation spaces and build forest corridors. So if we were going to be able to do that decently well, the species would automatically come. And that's the journey which we've embarked on passionately for the last few years, encouraging private sector, including acquiring some lands ourselves, to set up private conservation spaces in Sri Lanka.
So what species have you identified? We have a large number of endangered or species on the red list as well. So which ones have you prioritized?
We do something called a rapid biodiversity assessment, a couple of days, light touch. We are in 28 locations, but we've done it in 10. And in those 10, we've already found 1,159 species, out of which 550 are fauna and the rest are flora, including 125 endangered or critically endangered species. So it's a lot. And so this is a huge responsibility to kind of be almost a guardian or protector for these species who call those areas their home. So what we are prioritizing in a sense is not at individual species level, but for us the ecosystem is what becomes the key.
So like I said before, it's an ambitious plan. What challenges are you seeing in getting this in place now?
We didn't get much encouragement at the start because this was an ambitious plan. We were trying to set up forest corridors in the southwest part of Sri Lanka, the highest development area. So people said, you can't do it, the government will not support you, people will not give land, all of that. So we had all those challenges. But on ground now, when we start identifying lands is a challenge. When we acquire lands, encroachment, illegal logging, we've had people illegally taking our waterways out. People have come and destroyed our camera traps. We recently bought some lands which were being targeted by gem merchants. And mysteriously, a few weeks later, the entire ridge caught fire. So we've had multiple layers of challenges, not to mention legally. Legally, we are quite challenged because if you look at the law in Sri Lanka, if I have a property, I can fill it up, I can cut all the trees, I can fill all the water holes and kill every species and plant something. Nobody has a problem. But if me as a conservationist, if I own the same land and I say the water is drying up here, can I take these rare species and put them in the other corner of my estate? The law says no. So legally, agriculture has a license to kill. Conservation doesn't have a license to protect. That license is being held by the state. Now in areas that land is largely privately owned, obviously this becomes a huge challenge.
So Sriyan, what have you learned not to do in this project?
There were a number of people who had done wonderful conservation work in individual land locations. Many references, we could learn a lot. But nobody had done anything on scale like we're planning to do. I mean, right now we are covering about 2,500 acres and when you're running 25, 30 locations in parallel already, that's a different rhythm. So we learned, for example, that we thought we could just plant the trees and start, but we found that both natural predation as well as people became a huge problem. So we had to actually put protective nets and covers and spend more money, buy bigger trees, that kind of thing. Then when we went into land acquisition, There were lots of legal issues that you kind of don't see. But also our entire plan, when we spoke of this ambitious plan, nobody really believed us. And we didn't get the traction we wanted. When we narrowed it down to Western Province, forest corridors, and things like that, then people started saying, okay, now we understand what you're doing. So lots of lessons along the way.
Sri Lanka's species diversity is exceptionally concentrated in the southwestern part of the island, which is also leading to extinction as a result of some range restricted species. Why is that? Why is it so concentrated in these areas?
Both for geographic and climatic reasons. The southwest quarter of Sri Lanka is where all the rainforest and all the conditions are almost a happy breeding ground, so to speak, which is why most of the species that call Sri Lanka their unique home, the endemics, 90% of them are living there. So now it's not a question of how it happened, but since that is what it is, what are we going to do about it? If you overlay the protected forest areas in Sri Lanka, the forest department, other state forests, you'll find that the least cover from all of them is in the southwest quarter of the country, which is why we are driving this primarily as a privately owned initiative, private sector, private individuals. They are the only people who can give some hope for future for these endemics as far as Sri Lanka is concerned.
So, Sriyan, if plant doesn't intervene, what are we to expect?
Extinction. Unfortunately, that's what's on the roadmap, because these endemics, some of them are, like you said, very range restricted, and if no one is intervening, their lifespans are going to be extremely limited, so we are going to be counting down the species in the coming few decades. So plants intervention is to try to provide some hope here, but plant doesn't think it can do this by itself. So our mission is to be a social catalyst. We want to showcase this, to show people that private sector conservation is important in Sri Lanka and very possible. So we'd like more parties to join us, but we don't want to be the ones doing everything. We just want to show people how it can be done, and hopefully there'll be 10 plant similar, copycat or similar initiatives, or better, all doing the same thing. That is really our ambition.
You also look into rehabilitating depreciated land. How is that going?
Early days, but it's going well. I mean, so far thanks to the plantation companies like Haley's, we've been able to take broader landscape views. So in some estate ecosystems, we are building narrow forest corridors across 9, in some cases up to 13 continuous kilometers. So we've started reforesting those, quite ambitious, but right now we are actively working on 20 kilometers of land mass in terms of distance, different locations. We have created about 360 new acres of forested land, and obviously when you say forested land, early stages, so you have to wait 8-10 years to see the result. But we don't have time to wait 10 years and see if a pilot works to start the next one. So we bet on our knowledge and our abilities and the expert guidance and said we are making a play for the long term. So it's going well, early days.
So what can the rest of us do to help protect land, protect species, basically protect our ecosystem?
If there is a greater realization that we share this earth, that we have a responsibility to create or at least cohabit with the species and the animals, rather than say that's yours, this is mine. The moment we do that, because especially in the southwest corner, this is not about elephant in your backyard, it's about smaller species, and there's easily a lot more give and take which can happen. So that's the first, that elevated level of consciousness and willingness to tolerate a few species in your gardens, and of course at the larger levels, estates and things like that. Secondly is people who have the means. You have a lot of corporate donors who kind of look at sponsoring things, but sometimes merely planting trees doesn't make the cut. And there's a lot of greenwashing going on, as we know. So if you can channel your energy towards initiatives which are conservation oriented, rather than counting trees and making a tick box. You might plant less trees, but you'll build an ecosystem. You'll contribute to something better. And of course, then we need more people giving us more funding, more time, more expertise. So there are many ways that people can support. And we've had some people who've actually gifted their land to us, saying, you see that where people give land to temples and religious places. We had somebody giving us 20 acres of land in Bolgota saying, I think this is better for the long term, for the future generation. So I'm an optimist that more people might take that step, that they'll want to partner us either with their lands, they can continue to own the lands and work with us, or in a few cases people might also give us land.
What do you see for Sri Lanka's ecosystem in the next 5 to 10 years?
I can't say I can give a very positive picture. If you look at on the broader scale, if you look at the human-elephant conflict, the leopards, the monkey issue, there's a lot of tension, and the villain is the animal. Nobody's saying the villain is the politician who took off half the animal passage and gave it away for land, or the fact that 55-60% of Sri Lanka is already under agriculture, which is not efficient enough, or it's somebody encroaching. We are never the villains. So therefore, there's a huge amount of pressure coming on the species and through the disruption of the ecosystems. So it doesn't look a pretty picture. But what can change are two things. One is if there's an elevated, more holistic view at the top, saying some of these need to change, we need a better balance. That can start a new wave, obviously at national level and spread. But I feel optimistic because the generations who are coming up are far more knowledgeable about this issue. They have a greater elevated sense of consciousness and responsibility when it comes to the environment. And my belief is that the moment that generation starts taking over, we can hopefully start seeing better results. So I'm optimistic about plant and what it can bring to the country, but I'm more optimistic because we are creating a pilot at a time when a younger generation is coming up who are more open to these ideas. So I think a combination of those things, I think we can hold some candles of hope as a result.
So let's wish that the combination works. Thank you very much, Sriyan.
Thank you. Thank you for having us on the show.
Kaleidoscope is on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram and LinkedIn. Do subscribe, follow and like us. We do enjoy having you with us.